The first cry. They say the willow tree was already old when the first settlers came to Coldwater. Its branches hung low, brushing the dirt road like fingers reaching for the living. And every autumn, on one night only, the bark split and it wept thick red sap. The people called it Willow's Cry. The first child to touch it was a boy named Thomas Dyer. Back in 1886, he pressed his hand against the bleeding trunk, laughing as his friends dared him on. But when he pulled away, his face turned pale, because he heard something. The tree whispered his name and told him how he would die. 3 days later, he drowned in the river behind his father's mill, exactly the way the willow had promised. After that, the parents of Coldwater warned their children, never touch the willow, never listen to its cry. But children never listen, do they? Coldwater, Pennsylvania. Population, just under 2,000. It's the kind of town where nothing changes. The diner's still open, the church bells still ring every Sunday, and the same crooked willow tree still leans in the field at the edge of town. The tree is a story every kid grows up hearing, and every kid, sooner or later, gets dared to test it. That's where our story begins. It was late September. 4 friends, Danny, Claire, Josh, and little Sophie, snuck out just after dark. The moon was low, pale, and fat, lighting up the empty field where the willow stood. "Bet you won't touch it," Josh whispered, shoving Danny forward. Danny laughed nervously. "Come on, it's just a tree." "Then do it," Claire challenged. The willow loomed over them, branches swaying though the night was still. Its bark gleamed wet under the moonlight, as if it were already bleeding. Danny stepped closer. He could hear his heart thumping. The stories raced through his head. Kids who died in car accidents, in fires, in ways too strange to be coincidence. All after touching this tree. "Don't, Danny," Sophie whispered. She was only 11, the youngest. Her voice shook. "It's real." Danny smirked, trying to hide the chill in his chest. He pressed his hand to the bark. The wood was warm, too warm. And then, he heard it. A voice, not outside, but inside his skull. A whisper so soft it made his bones ache. It said his name, and then it told him. Danny stumbled back, face white as chalk. His friends grabbed him, asking what he heard. But he just shook his head, staring at the ground. He wouldn't say, but 3 nights later, the whisper's promise would come true. The first thing you need to understand about Coldwater is this: death never feels like an accident here. When something bad happens, people always whisper the same thing. The willow told them, and Danny was about to prove that true. It was 3 nights after the dare. Rain hammered the rooftops of Coldwater, flooding the cracked sidewalks and turning the fields into dark, sucking mud. Danny's mom thought he was asleep upstairs, headphones on, music blaring like always. But he wasn't. Danny sat at his desk, staring at a sheet of paper. His hand shook as he wrote, then crossed it out, then started again. One sentence over and over. It said, "I'll die in the water." His eyes were hollow, skin pale, like he hadn't slept since that night at the willow. He kept hearing the whisper, even when he tried to drown it out with music. Even when he pressed his palms over his ears until they hurt. It was always there, inside his skull, patient, certain. That night, Danny left his room. His mother didn't hear him slip out the back door. His sneakers splashed through puddles as he walked down the old road toward the Coldwater Quarry. Locals call it the Pit, a deep hole filled with black water where kids partied in summer, but no one swam after dark. The rain pounded harder as Danny reached the edge. He looked down into the swirling water, breathing fast. And then he stepped forward. They found him the next morning. His body floated face down, tangled in weeds at the quarry's edge. No one knew why he went out there or how he fell. But his friends, they knew, because he'd told them the willow spoke. And now the whisper had come true. Coldwater was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody. Danny's death hit like a hammer to glass. The church overflowed for the funeral. Teachers, neighbors, kids with red eyes and tissues crumpled in their fists. Claire sat 2 pews back, fists clenched so tight her nails dug into her palms. She hadn't slept since Danny died. She kept replaying that night in her head, the way he touched the tree, the way his face drained, the silence that followed. Josh sat beside her, trying to act tough, but his jaw wouldn't stop trembling. And little Sophie. She sat alone at the end of the pew, staring at the coffin, her eyes wide and unblinking. When the pastor spoke about God's mysterious plan, Sophie whispered, almost too quiet to hear. It wasn't God. It was the Willow. Claire snapped her head toward her. Sophie, stop. But Sophie didn't stop. She just kept staring. After the service, as the coffin was lowered into the ground, Josh finally spoke. He knew, he muttered, voice cracking. Danny knew it was coming. Claire glared at him. Don't say that. I'm telling you he knew. He said the tree told him. Claire shoved him. Shut up, Josh. Because she couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand the thought that the stories were real. That the tree wasn't just a dare, but a death sentence. But Sophie? She didn't argue. She just whispered again, her voice flat, certain. The Willow doesn't lie. That night, Claire dreamed of the tree. She saw it under the pale moon, branches swaying, red sap dripping down the bark like blood. And in her dream, the whispers weren't meant for Danny. They were calling her name. Coldwater doesn't forget. When Danny's body was pulled from the quarry, the story spread faster than wildfire. Kids whispered in hallways. Parents muttered at the diner over burnt coffee. Nobody said it out loud in church, but everybody thought the same thing. The Willow claimed him. By the end of the week, every kid in town knew the story. Some swore they could hear the tree crying at night, red sap dripping like blood onto the roots. And then came the dares. Friday night, 2 freshmen, Eli and Brandon, snuck out to the field. They wanted proof, wanted to see if the whispers were real. The moon was high, the grass wet with dew, and the Willow stood in the middle of it, all like a black skeleton against the stars. Go on, Brandon pushed. Touch it. Eli swallowed. What if it talks? Brandon smirked. Then ask it for lottery numbers. They both laughed, but their laughter didn't last. Because when Eli pressed his hand to the bark, he froze. His eyes widened, his breath hitched. And then, just like Danny, his face turned white as bone. He jerked his hand away and stumbled back. Brandon laughed nervously. What did it say? But Eli didn't answer. He just stared at the tree, lips trembling. Lie? Brandon whispered. What did it say? Eli turned to him, voice so faint it barely carried. It said, I'll burn. 2 days later, Eli's house caught fire. No one knew how it started. His parents swore the stove was off, no candles, nothing burning. But the blaze tore through the old wood frame house in minutes. The neighbors could only watch as the flames devoured it whole. When the firefighters dragged Eli out, his body was blackened, twisted. Brandon stood across the street, face streaked with tears and ash. He knew the tree hadn't lied, and now he couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Eli's face, heard his last words. He kept wondering, if the tree told him his death, what would it say to me? After Eli's death, Coldwater changed. Parents locked their doors earlier. Kids whispered about the Willow in terrified voices. And even the pastor's sermons carried a sharper edge, fire and brimstone, warnings of sin. But Sophie grew quiet, too quiet. One afternoon, Claire found her sitting alone on the swings behind the school, staring at the horizon. You okay? Claire asked gently. Sophie didn't look up. She just dragged her shoes through the dirt. I hear it, she whispered. Claire frowned. Hear what? The Willow, Sophie's voice cracked. It talks to me, even when I'm not near it. Claire froze. Her stomach dropped. You're just imagining things, Soph. But Sophie turned, her eyes wide, filled with tears. No, it tells me things, about people, about what's coming. Claire's mouth went dry. What does it tell you? Sophie leaned closer, her voice barely audible. It told me how you're going to die. That night, Claire lay awake, staring at her ceiling. Every creak of the house made her flinch. Every gust of wind outside made her think of branches scratching her window. Because if Sophie was telling the truth, then the Willow wasn't just claiming kids who touched it. It was reaching farther. And its whispers were spreading. Coldwater had one sheriff, Mark Holloway. A man in his 50s with a tired face and hands that shook whenever he lit a cigarette. Mark had lived in Coldwater all his life. He knew the stories. He'd been a teenager once, standing with a group of boys under the willow, daring each other to touch it. But he never did, and he never would. The morning after Eli's funeral, Mark drove his cruiser down to the field. The grass was wet with dew, and the willow loomed heavy under the gray sky. Red sap oozed down its bark, thicker than before, dripping into the soil like blood into open wounds. Mark stood there, hat in hand, smoke curling from his cigarette. He muttered under his breath, "Not again, God, not again." Because he remembered the last time. Back in '89, when 3 kids died in one autumn. One in a car crash, one struck by lightning, one who never woke up. They'd all touched the tree. And now it was starting again. That afternoon, he went door to door. He told parents to keep their kids inside, to stay away from the willow. But kids never listen. By the end of the week, 3 more dared each other to touch it. Lena and Luke Harper were 14. Mischievous, restless, the kind of kids who never feared anything. They dragged their friend Megan out to the field on a Saturday night, laughing as they ran through the tall grass. The willow's branches swayed overhead, dripping red into the moonlight. "Go on, Luke," Lena teased. "Don't chicken out." Luke grinned and slapped his hand against the bark. His laughter died instantly. His face drained of color. "What did it say?" Megan asked nervously. Luke's lips trembled. "It said, 'I'll break.'" Lena shoved him playfully. "You're making it up. Watch." And before Megan could stop her, Lena pressed her hand against the bark too. She froze, her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then she jerked back, shaking. Megan grabbed her. "Lena, what did it say?" Lena stared at her twin brother. Her voice came out flat, hollow. "It said, 'I'll burn.'" The 3 of them stood in silence, the wind howling through the branches above. Megan's heart pounded. Because she knew. She knew the tree never lied. 2 nights later, Luke was riding his bike home. The rain had just ended, leaving the road slick. He was less than a block from his house when his front tire hit a pothole. The sound that followed was sickening. The neighbors found him minutes later. His bike twisted in the ditch. His leg bent at an angle no leg should bend. His neck snapped. The willow had been right. Luke Harper was broken. Megan barely slept after that. She knew Lena's turn was next. She begged her not to go out, not to play with matches, not to even stand near the stove. But Lena just laughed. "You're scared of a stupid tree," she said. "I'm not." But fear doesn't protect you. The fire started in the Harper's garage. No one ever figured out how. Gasoline cans exploded. Flames ripped through the walls, smoke choking the air. By the time the fire trucks arrived, Lena's body was already gone. Burned alive. At the funeral, Megan sat trembling in the pew, whispering to herself, "The willow doesn't lie. The willow doesn't lie." And for the first time, she realized something worse. The tree wasn't just killing kids. It was feeding. After the twins' funeral, Megan stopped speaking. Her parents thought it was trauma. Teachers said she needed counseling. But her friends whispered the truth. Megan had heard something. She hadn't touched the willow herself. But she'd stood close enough when Lena and Luke did. Close enough to catch a fragment of its whisper. And now, it echoed inside her skull. Every night, she lay awake, clutching her pillow, shaking as the whisper grew louder. It didn't just tell her how she would die. It told her about others. The tree wasn't done. When death circles a town, word spreads. That's when he arrived. His name was Aaron Harker, a freelance journalist who'd made a career writing about small-town tragedies. He rolled into Coldwater in a dusty blue sedan, camera bag over his shoulder, notebook always in hand. He started with questions at the diner, then the church, then the school. "Strange run of bad luck, huh?" he said with a smirk to the waitress pouring his coffee. She didn't smile back. "It's not bad luck," she whispered. "It's the willow." Aaron raised an eyebrow. "The tree?" She leaned closer. "You're not from here. You don't understand. It doesn't just take kids. It never stops." For the first time, Aaron felt a chill crawl up his spine. Sheriff Holloway didn't like Aaron asking questions. He caught him out by the field one evening, photographing the willow as its red sap oozed down the bark. "You should leave," the sheriff muttered. Aaron clicked his camera. "What's the story, Sheriff?" Every town has one. Why does this place blame a tree for its tragedies? The sheriff's face darkened. His cigarette trembled between his fingers. Because we've seen it. For generations. Aaron pushed. Then tell me. The sheriff exhaled smoke, eyes fixed on the willow. Back in 1792, when Coldwater was just a cluster of cabins, they hung a woman from that tree. Said she was a witch. She cursed the town with her last breath. Said the tree would carry her voice. That it would bleed for the sins of the people who killed her. Aaron's pen froze over his notebook. You're telling me this is witchcraft? The sheriff's voice dropped to a whisper. I'm telling you the willow remembers. That night, Megan woke screaming. Her parents rushed in, but she didn't see them. She saw only the tree. Its branches filled her room, scraping the walls, dripping red sap across her sheets. Her parents shook her, begged her to wake up. She gasped, eyes wide, whispering one sentence over and over. It's not done. It's not done. Down in the field, miles away, the willow bled thicker than ever. Its roots pulsed in the earth, stretching farther, feeding, reaching, and anyone who stood too close could swear they heard it. The whisper, soft, patient, promising death. Aaron Harker didn't believe in curses. He believed in headlines. The tree that kills kids. The curse of Coldwater. He could already see the article making him a fortune. But something about the way people looked at him when he asked questions that haunted him. Especially the sheriff. That night, Aaron broke into the town archives. A single locked room in the library's basement, thick with dust and mold. He sorted through brittle ledgers, old maps, yellowed newspapers, and then he found it. A diary. The pages belonged to Reverend Jonathan Clay, written in 1792, the year the so-called witch was hanged. The entry was short, but the words shook Aaron. She would not repent. She swore her blood would seep into the roots. She swore the tree would weep for eternity. Her whisper would pass through the bark and into the ears of our children, binding them to the deaths they deserved. We buried her beneath the willow, but still she cries. Aaron closed the diary, heart pounding. The witch wasn't just hanged. She was buried under the tree. Meanwhile, Sophie grew worse. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. She sat in her room with the lights off, whispering back to the voice no one else could hear. Claire begged her to talk, but Sophie only looked up once, her face pale, her eyes hollow. It's telling me you're deaf again, she said, every night. Louder and louder. Claire's skin crawled. Then tell me what it says. Sophie shook her head violently. No, if I tell you, it'll come faster. She buried her face in her knees, rocking back and forth. It wants you. It's waiting for you. Claire backed away, her stomach turning cold. Because Sophie wasn't lying. She believed every word. And deep down, Claire feared she was right. Aaron wasn't finished. He drove out to the willow again, this time in daylight. The field was silent, the grass swaying in the breeze. He brought a shovel. He didn't care if it was trespassing. He wanted proof. At first, he thought he was wasting his time. But then, less than a foot down, he struck wood. A coffin. The wood was black with rot, splintering at the touch. Aaron's heart hammered as he pried it open. Inside were bones. Small, fragile bones. Not a witch's body. Not a woman at all. A child. And scrawled across the inside of the coffin lid, burned into the wood with desperate fingers, were the words, "She takes us." Aaron stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. The town hadn't told the whole story. They hadn't just buried a witch here, they buried children. That same night, Megan's silence shattered. She woke her parents with screams so loud they rattled the windows. They rushed into her room, but she was standing in the corner, facing the wall, scratching words into the plaster with her fingernails until they bled. Over and over, the same phrase. The willow remembers. The willow remembers. When they pulled her away, she turned, eyes wild, mouth frothing with spit. "It's hungry," she shrieked. It's not just whispers, it feeds. Every death makes it stronger. Her parents held her as she thrashed, sobbing, begging them to cut the tree down. But the willow had stood for centuries, and no axe had ever touched its trunk without snapping in two. Aaron couldn't shake the image of the coffin, child's bones, scratched words, lies buried in Coldwater's soil. He stormed into the sheriff's office, diary in hand. "You knew," Aaron snapped, slamming the book down. "This wasn't just one woman. This was children. You've been hiding it." Sheriff Holloway looked up slowly, his eyes bloodshot, jaw tight. He didn't flinch. "You think you're the first to dig here?" he muttered. "Others came before you. Outsiders, curious. Every one of them either left broken or never left at all." Aaron's throat tightened. "So it's true? The tree kills?" The sheriff leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low growl. "The willow doesn't kill, it remembers. It calls. And when kids touch it, they don't just hear whispers. They hear what the town deserves." Aaron froze. The town. The sheriff's lips trembled. "We're all guilty. All of us, bound to her roots." Before Aaron could ask more, the sheriff shoved the diary back toward him. "Leave, Harker. Leave now. Before it speaks your name, too." But Aaron wasn't leaving. Not yet. Despite funerals, despite warnings, the kids of Coldwater couldn't resist. It was a Tuesday night when 4 high school juniors snuck into the field. They'd been drinking cheap beer, laughing too loud, stumbling under the willow's shadow. "Bet none of you got the guts," one boy slurred. A girl rolled her eyes, stepping forward. "It's just a tree." She pressed her palm against the bleeding bark. Her laughter cut off instantly. Her face drained of color. Her hand trembled against the wood as her eyes rolled back. When she finally pulled away, she whispered one word, voice shaking, "Teeth." The others stared. "What?" Her lip quivered. "It said I'll die by teeth." The boys laughed nervously, pretending not to care. But when the girl went missing 2 nights later, nobody was laughing. They found her body near the edge of the forest, throat torn open. Bite marks deep and ragged across her skin. No animal tracks. No explanation. Only whispers. At the same time, Sophie was filling notebook after notebook with drawings. Her parents thought it was just her way of coping. But Claire saw the pictures. She saw the details. Every page showed the willow, its branches dripping blood, its roots curling like veins into the ground. And beneath it, bodies, children, adults, skeletons twisted in the roots like the tree was feeding on them. But the worst drawing was the one Sophie tried to hide. It showed Claire herself, lying at the base of the willow, her face pale, her eyes lifeless, blood spilling from her mouth. Claire's hand shook as she held it. "Soph, what is this?" Sophie whispered, "It's what the tree showed me. It's waiting for you." Aaron dug deeper. In the courthouse basement, he found another set of records, birth and death certificates stretching back 2 centuries, and a pattern emerged. Every 20 or 30 years, clusters of children died mysteriously, always in autumn, always within weeks of each other. Drownings, fires, accidents. And nearly every victim traced back to the same handful of family names. Coldwater wasn't cursed at random. The willow was hunting bloodlines. Aaron circled the names, heart pounding as he realized what they meant. Claire's family, Sophie's, even the sheriff's own lineage. The tree wasn't killing strangers. It was feeding on its own children. The courthouse basement stank of mildew and rot, but Aaron kept digging. He found a locked metal cabinet wedged behind old crates of tax records. It looked untouched for decades. One kick, and the rusty latch snapped. Inside were yellowed parchment sheets, brittle with age. The handwriting was spidery, formal dated 1793, the year after the woman's hanging. It wasn't just a record. It was a pact. Aaron read by the flickering bulb overhead. "By her blood, we seal the land. By her curse, we are bound. Let the willow stand as witness to guard the guilty and feed upon the fruit of our loins. Each generation shall pay. Each child born shall know her voice. And none shall escape until the last branch burns." Aaron's throat dried. His pen trembled in his hand. The founders hadn't just killed a witch. They had bargained with her. They gave her their children. And the willow was the altar. That same night, Sophie woke screaming again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Claire rushed in, only to stop cold. Sophie wasn't in bed. She was standing in the corner, facing the wall. Her small hand smeared with fresh red sap that had no business being inside the house. Claire's voice broke. "Soph, Where did you? Sophie turned slowly. Her eyes were all black, drowned in darkness. Her mouth opened, and Claire heard not her daughter's voice, but the Willow's whisper. She is ours. She always was. The window burst open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet bark and iron blood. Claire grabbed Sophie, shaking her. Stop it. Wake up. For a moment, her daughter's eyes cleared, but she whispered something that made Claire's knees buckle. Mommy, I saw you hanging from the branches. The girl torn apart by teeth wasn't the last. 2 more deaths followed in quick succession. A boy drowned in his bathtub, though there was no water in his lungs, only sap. Another was found in the school gym, body broken as if dropped from a great height, though the ceiling beams were untouched. Parents pulled their children out of school. Curfews were set, but still the whispers spread. And Megan, the one who had gone silent, finally broke. She walked into the cafeteria at lunch, eyes hollow, voice flat. It doesn't matter if you hide. It doesn't matter if you pray. We're all just feeding it. Then she collapsed, convulsing on the tiles. Blood poured from her ears. When the paramedics came, they whispered too. The tree's curse was no longer confined to those who touched it. It was leaking into the town. Aaron sat alone in his motel room, the pact spread across the bed, his recorder still running. His hands shook as he whispered into it. They didn't just murder her. They made a deal. A covenant sealed in blood. That's why the sheriff won't fight it. Why the town doesn't leave. Coldwater isn't just cursed. It's complicit. He looked in the mirror above the desk. His own face looked older, grayer than yesterday. His eyes were bloodshot, veins crawling red. He froze. Sap was seeping from the corner of his left eye. The willow wasn't waiting for him to touch it. It was already inside him. Coldwater woke to screams. Not from the children this time, but from the grown. At dawn, a woman staggered down Main Street, her nightgown drenched in crimson. People thought she was stabbed until they realized it wasn't her blood. It dripped steadily from her hair, her hands, her eyes, and she was laughing. Behind her, dogs barked and howled as the willow's shadow stretched across the town like a spider's legs. The tree's sap ran thicker that morning than anyone had ever seen. Red streams carving down its trunk, soaking the soil until it glistened like open veins. By midday, 3 more collapsed. Each whispered the same thing before death. The roots are under us. The church filled to bursting. Parents dragged their children inside, clutching rosaries, Bibles, anything that could serve as a shield. Pastor Weller shouted from the pulpit, sweat running down his face. Coldwater has sinned for too long. The willow drinks because we let it. Burn it, cut it down, rip it from the earth. But the sheriff was waiting at the doors. Anyone touches that tree, they die worse. You think I don't know? My grandfather tried. The whole house burned with him inside. You want that for your family? The congregation fell silent. Mothers wept. Fathers clenched their jaws. Nobody moved. Because in their bones, they knew he was right. That night, Claire held Sophie in her arms, rocking her as if the motion could keep the whispers away. But Sophie was colder than she should have been. Too still. Her tiny voice broke the silence. Mommy, they told me something new. Claire swallowed. What did they say, baby? Sophie's eyes rolled up, white showing, her voice dropping low, not her own. They don't just want us. They want everyone who ever came from here. Every bloodline. Every breath. Until nothing is left but the willow. Claire shook her. No, don't listen to them. Sophie blinked, coming back for a moment, tears spilling down her cheeks. Mommy, I don't want to hang from the branches. Aaron barely slept. His veins itched, his vision flickered, and when he coughed, flecks of sap stained his tissue. But he kept working. He found another page in the packet from 1793, a note scrawled at the bottom, in a hand shakier than the rest. The curse can only be broken when the willow is fed its keeper. Blood for blood. The last child of the founding line must be given. Aaron froze. The founders had sacrificed their descendants to keep the willow strong. The town had lived under this quiet arrangement for centuries. But the tree wasn't satisfied anymore. It wanted all of them. And if the note was right, the only way to end was to give the tree the bloodline it craved. Aaron whispered into his recorder, voice breaking. Coldwater was never cursed. It was chosen, and the only way out is a child's death. By midnight, the ground itself began to move. Main Street cracked open, splitting asphalt like paper. Roots, black and slick with sap, surged upward, winding through the cracks, smashing cars aside like toys. People ran, screaming, but the roots hunted. They coiled around ankles, wrists, throats, dragging bodies toward the outskirts, toward the Willow. The sheriff tried to rally his deputies, firing shotguns into the earth. But the roots didn't die. They bled, thick red sap sprayed from them, hot and hissing like boiling tar. One deputy slipped, screaming as it coated his skin, melting it down to bone. And all the while, the willow groaned. Its branches swayed though no wind blew, a low, guttural sound that rattled windows and set teeth chattering. Coldwater was being dragged into its grave. Aaron staggered toward the tree, clutching his recorder, his body failing. Sap leaked constantly from his nose now, staining his collar. Dozens of townsfolk were already there, pulled by invisible strings. Children in nightclothes, their eyes blank. Mothers clutching infants. Fathers clutching axes as though they might protect their families. The willow loomed above, dripping its crimson tears onto them all. Aaron lifted the recorder. It's not just feeding anymore. It's claiming. This isn't a curse, it's a harvest. Behind him, Claire appeared, dragging Sophie by the hand. Her daughter was pale, trembling, but her eyes were still hers for now. Claire's voice shook. "Tell me you found a way." Aaron couldn't answer. Not yet. The parchment burned in Aaron's pocket. He pulled it out, forcing the words through trembling lips. The curse. It says the willow can only be stopped if it's fed the bloodline of its keeper. The last of the founder's children. Claire froze. What does that mean? Aaron's throat locked. It means Sophie. She's descended. The tree wants her. It always wanted her. Claire's knees buckled, but she pulled Sophie close, shaking her head violently. No, no, you don't get to tell me my daughter is some kind of offering. Aaron's voice cracked. If she dies, it ends. If she doesn't, it takes everyone. The tree's roots throbbed under their feet, pulsing like veins. The air filled with the sound of children crying, yet none of their mouths moved. The willow itself was whispering, "Give her to us, or we take you all." Everyone fell silent as Sophie stepped forward, slipping free of her mother's grasp. She looked up at the tree, small shoulders trembling. Her voice was soft, but it carried. "I already saw it, Mommy. Remember? I told you. I saw me hanging from the branches." Claire broke, sobbing, clutching her face. "No, baby, no, please don't." Sophie turned to Aaron, her black hair matted with tears. "Will it stop if I do it? Will it leave them alone?" Aaron couldn't breathe. The recorder slipped from his hand. The whispers surged, shaking the ground. "Yes, yes, yes." The townsfolk closed in, not out of malice, but desperation. Parents begged Claire to listen. Children's voices chanted in unison, guided by the tree. Blood for blood. Blood for blood. Blood for blood. Claire screamed, clutching Sophie tight, refusing to let go. But the roots coiled higher, wrapping around their legs. The willow wanted its due. Sophie kissed her mother's cheek, whispering through tears, "It's okay, Mommy. I don't want them to hurt anymore. I'm not scared." Then, before Claire could stop her, Sophie walked into the roots. They parted for her, gentle, almost tender. The branches bent low, cradling her small body as they lifted her high. And then the tree took her. Her scream tore the night in half. The sap ran darker, thicker, until the roots shuddered and went still. The voices stopped. The town fell silent. Coldwater breathed again. For the first time in a century, Coldwater was silent. The willow tree, its branches slick with blood, its roots coiled tight like sleeping serpents, stood motionless in the night. The people who had been dragged here slowly backed away, their eyes clearing as though waking from a dream. Mothers clutched their children. Men dropped their axes and wept. The town, for one fragile heartbeat, believed it was over. But Claire knew silence was never the end. She collapsed to her knees, staring up at the branches where her daughter had vanished. Her hands trembled, reaching for something that wasn't there. Her scream was not like the others. It didn't come from fear, but from the kind of grief that tears a soul in half. And as she cried, The willow's bark groaned. From deep inside, something stirred. Aaron staggered to her side, coughing, the last of his strength draining out. "Claire, listen to me. I don't think it's over." She turned on him, her face twisted in rage. "You told me she'd stop it. You said, 'I know.'" He shouted, clutching his chest. "But the curse, it's never that simple. Blood for blood doesn't end a curse. It feeds it." The ground trembled. The branches bent low again. A single drop of sap fell onto Claire's cheek. It was warm, and it pulsed like a heartbeat. Then she heard it, her daughter's voice. "Mommy." Claire's eyes shot upward. Between the branches, a face shimmered, Sophie's face, pale and distant, pressed against the bark like glass. Her lips moved slowly. "It hurts. Don't leave me here." Claire's scream broke the night all over again. Aaron fell to his knees, clutching his recorder one last time. His voice shook as he spoke into it. "The child's soul is bound to the willow. The curse doesn't just kill, it collects." Every death was not an ending, it was an offering. All around, the bark writhed. Faces pressed out of the wood children, dozens of them, their eyes wide, mouths opening in silent screams. Some were decades old, their skin cracked like parchment. Others were fresh, still wet with sap. Coldwater's children had never left. They were still here. The willow whispered through 1,000 mouths. One must stay. One must feed. One must take the keeper's place. Claire realized the truth. Sophie wasn't meant to die. She was meant to stay, to become the new voice inside the tree. And unless someone took her place, she would never be free. Claire rose, wiping her face, trembling but resolute. She looked at Aaron, broken, dying but still recording. "You write this down," she said, her voice cold as stone. "You tell them. You tell everyone what happened here. You make sure no one forgets." Aaron's lips trembled. "Claire, don't." But it was too late. She walked toward the willow. Roots curled around her feet, not in violence, but in welcome. The branches bent low again, the same way they had for Sophie. Claire looked up, tears streaming, and whispered to the tree, "Take me. Let her go." The whispers surged, hungry, eager. Sophie's face pressed harder against the bark. "Mommy?" Claire smiled through her tears. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." The branches coiled around her body, lifting her higher. She screamed not from fear, but from agony as the bark split open and swallowed her whole. For one moment, Sophie's face faded from the tree. Then Claire's appeared in its place. Her mouth opened, sap spilling from her lips, and the willow cried. Coldwater survived. The cracks in the street were repaired. The homes were rebuilt. But no one forgot. The willow still stood at the town's edge. Its bark no longer bled openly, but if you got close enough, you could hear it. Whispers, a woman's voice. Sometimes calling for her daughter. Sometimes warning anyone who dared approach. And on the anniversary, just after midnight, the bark split and red sap dripped once again. Children swore they heard a lullaby in the wind. A mother's voice, soft and broken, whispering through the branches. "Don't touch the tree. Don't listen to the whispers. Please, don't let it take you too." And Coldwater learned the truth the hard way. The willow never dies. It only waits.